Yeah, I think that's critical. You have to know who your audience is. You have to. We talk about that a lot. You have to know what's expected of them, what they're motivated by. I always craft things a little bit differently depending on who I'm talking to, right? So if I'm pitching a bid on a large piece of business, I'm not going to get into the weeds on the technology of how this particular thing is going to work. I'm going to tell them this is what it means for you, and this is the impact that you should expect. With that same example, if I'm talking to someone very technical who's maybe going to be held accountable or responsible for this particular line of business and knows a lot about the nitty gritty, I'm going to get into the weeds. I'm going to say, this is how this functions. A has to match with B and you'll get C. I'm going to get really detailed because they're going to have all those kind of questions and it's going to be really critical for them to know the answers. And the same with analysis. If I'm talking about a brand and how promotion performed, it's not just going to be high level impact. It's going to be a little bit more granular. It's going to say, this is what you executed well. This is what you didn't execute well. This is what you maybe need to move forward. This, if you look at it in a little different lens, we could have a different viewpoint on it. I'm going to give them as much detail as they would need. So it varies drastically, whether I'm talking to a CEO, a brand manager, someone in IT, someone on my internal team. I'm going to talk to a little bit more casually, figure things out as I go rather than always be buttoned up. But again, that'll be different for my boss or my CEO, right? I'm going to be pretty buttoned up. For me, it's really, when it comes to that, it's more about the individual. If you have a certain respect, I'm not going to walk up to one of my senior vice presidents and assume that we're in a casual relationship. I'm going to kind of test those waters, but I think everybody's different. I have a lot of people that are senior to me that I have a very professional relationship with, but I have a lot of people that I have a very personal, fun, relaxed, casual relationship with too. And I think it just depends on that individual. I'm a big proponent of understanding where the person you're talking to or communicating with is coming from, whether that's their position, which I think is important, and also what motivates and drives them, and also their personality. I think those are all important when figuring out how to communicate best with them.
I think the real issue is recognizing that you have different audiences and that they want different things. So if I'm working with a troubled auto company, for example, General Motors might get parts from them. General Motors wants to know how they're doing, but all they care about is getting parts. Their bank wants to know how they're doing. All they care about is getting their money back. Their suppliers might want to know how they're doing. All they want to know is they're going to get paid and keep a customer. Their ownership group, maybe it's a private equity firm that owns them. And you have to tailor your message to each group of people. There are expectations, and you need to recognize what different people are looking for and tailor your message to that. So if I'm talking to some lawyers, let's say we deal with distressed companies, let's say some bankruptcy lawyers, they're not finance people. They understand the basics of finance, but they don't want to hear a bunch of financial jargon. Whereas if I'm talking to a company's lender, then as a former lender myself, I'm going to use all that jargon because it's easier. They know what I'm talking about. It's quicker. You can just get to the point, but they want to know different things. What the lawyers want to know might relate to drafting some document. What the bankers want to know relates to often them seeking approval internally to, grant some sort of accommodation or something like that. And so you really need to just focus on what it is they want and then give them what they want. If I'm interacting with somebody, you just got to think, well, what's the purpose of this interaction? And tailor your message accordingly. My boss is a high-level person, so I'm usually trying to ask high-level questions because she doesn't want to get into the details. My colleagues, more often than not, we're working together on something and we have complementary skill sets, so I'm trying to help them where I know, or I think I know, where they need the help, and I'm trying to listen and learn on the elements of a deal where it's not my expertise.
It's not about you. It's about being understood and about, reaching out. And so, making people feel comfortable. But understanding, seeing it from the perspective of your listener and kind of catering to that. It varies for me along a few different dimensions, right? It's like definitely like internal people versus external people. So like customers versus people within the company. There's things that are confidential that I can talk about with certain groups and not others. Obviously, if it's externally, to understand the implications of what I'm writing more. So it's much more, it can be more formal. There's definitely, the relationship to the person. There are people with whom I joke and tease, and that's part of the communication, whether by email or in person. And there's people with whom it's more professional. In some cases, you want to, for me, like if you have more technical audiences, less technical audiences, but also like, what you're trying to kind of empathically do with people. Like sometimes, I want to let them know that they can trust me. So like, we're talking with customers, and we actually do a lot of like user research and stuff like that. And we're talking to subject matter experts, and they struggle to open up. So I want them to know that like I respect their work and I'm interested in what they're saying. Versus other times it's like I have to somehow project that I'm an authority. Everything from like, am I swearing or am I not swearing? I work at a company where it's cool to swear. So I'm like, I'm not going to say it for your video, but this is very different. Or using words that they know. Sometimes there are words and terms that denote understanding something or not. So, I sometimes work in the transportation industry and I work in rail. Call them locomotives, don't call them trains. But they're like little things that seem like they don't matter, but they're like, it turns on a light bulb that says, oh, this person understands where I'm coming from.
There are, over the course of a year, like hundreds of advertisers that I have to deal with. And each of them is pretty unique in their experience with like both submitting advertising and submitting sort of these technical documents. In the nature of this work, I have to adapt my writing for the different audiences. Again, everybody is sort of coming through the door for the same reason. They're advertising, or they've bought advertising, but their understanding of what they bought from like a technical standpoint is always across the board. And so it became clear that I had to adapt who I was writing to and what I was going to say to them to get what I needed, or really what they needed. IO, the insert order comes in for whatever the ad is. There's an email sort of contact name. First thing I do, if I don't recognize the URL of the email address, look it up, and I can tell pretty much immediately like I'm dealing with a mom and pop shop that clearly doesn't know what design is and doesn't know what advertising is, and wouldn't know basically what they're submitting, and they may or may not have somebody professional working for them that I would be then dealing with. Or it is a very professional company that clearly has like an agency on record working with them, and so I don't have to deal with that. I'll deal with those two separate two people separately. But there are opportunities where people buy this advertising. They've never done anything like that before. They're excited about it, and they just kind of don't know what they got. And then they're excited, but they're anxious as well because, they spend a lot of money and they want it to work, whatever that means. I kind of have to hold their hand as far as like dealing with what they have to submit. It's a learning opportunity to do a lot of this work communication because you start learning the idiosyncrasies of everybody's communication. In the same way, I think that when you meet people in person and they may or may not talk in a a way that you like or that's useful.
I would, without a doubt, it's our customers. So it's not our brokers. It's our customers, the people that we're trying, because they definitely have different needs. And sometimes you can make a message generic and send it out, and you've made it too generic for some people, and they just go right past it, right? Because I'm trying to get their attention and sell them something usually, and a lot of buyers, they are looking for reasons to ignore messages, right? It's like, oh, I don't like that one, throwing that one in trash. Don't like that one in trash, right? So that can be a challenge to send the message that catches their eyes, but at the same time is not so specific that it is a turnoff for somebody else. Intra-company, we have a lot of, we call them retail reps, but really they're just like typical stockbroker guys that work for us. And if I'm too specific it will apply to some people and not to others. I'm a big believer in dumbing things down. I try to make things simple, I try to I try to be generic. I try. Yeah.
So to start with, sort of like who I've got to sort of adapt my communication to is that who I work with ranges from talking to programmers and developers up to customer support all the way through to like sales and even clients. So if I'm talking to developers, I've got to have a lot more technical communication in there, a lot more details, and actually a lot more casual voice goes really far in helping communicate with a developer. If we're talking more about talking with sales or with clients, you have to adapt a lot more professional voice that I think speaks a lot more to their needs than you do to a developer. I think being over formal with developers puts them on edge. If they don't know you well, it may intimidate them a little bit in a sense that they, and a lot of times they'll kind of automatically jump to this like, you're a business guy, you don't know what you're talking about type idea. Honestly, just because it's the world that they've come from. I mean, I came from the developer world, so maybe it's a little bit of falling back on a voice I'm more comfortable with. But in addition to that, I think developers they're not used to having to be in front of clients and be hyper professional. A lot of times they're in jobs where they don't have any dress code, where there's it's more about getting the job done, and they've grown up in just more casual environments. So being able to speak to them sort of in a more casual manner that goes a long way to, besides just giving them the details they need, also create that empathy that makes getting the job done a lot easier. With clients, I think it makes them feel more at ease when they feel like you have control of the conversation and know where it's going. And they also feel more assured that some sort of action is going to come out of their communication with you. There's definitely preparation that's to go into that. And some of that for me can range from just making sure I've read over all the communications I've had in the past before I start that communication. Sometimes even making out some broad talking points. Almost structuring the conversation when I talk to them is when I get on the phone with them or in person. I'll say, I'm calling you today to talk about this XYZ. My goal out of this conversation is to share this and get this from you, and then start to actually dive into an actual conversation.